Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. I am Kevin Rayfuse. Thank you, everyone, number one, for just waiting this episode out and waiting for it to hit your podcast feeds because technical difficulties, I don't even think adequately remotely describes the past week and a half that Justin and I have been dealing with here. Just dealing with little technical issues on the back end. As you can see, it is just me today. I haven't done a solo episode of the podcast since, oh man, I mean, you got to be way back. I'm talking like early day one listeners. I think there was an episode because I vividly remember recording it on my parents' couch back in, I think 2014. Like I'm talking maybe within the first 3 months of the podcast starting with Tim and Justin and I. And it was breaking down game three of the NBA Finals, which at the time was between the Spurs and the Heat. So obviously that series was 1-1 at the time, and so we know the Spurs ended up going to blow the doors off the Heat for the rest of that series. But at the time, that game three was a pivotal game, so I remember doing that. So bear with me. Justin is off again. We are dealing with massive technical difficulties. We are expecting to be back online hopefully next week. But again, we've missed a lot of time. The last time we recorded an episode, we were in the middle of round one. Now we're a couple games into round two. So on this episode, we got a whole lot to talk about, including all of our second round talks. Not going to be any previews, obviously, but I'll take a look at all the series as well. Plus, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about the teams who have been eliminated at this point. But of course, we do want to start with warm-up jumpers. Last episode, we did learn that Jordan Clarkson from Utah had won the Sixth Man of the Year, and Julius Randle had won the Most Improved Player. I don't really think, I mean, especially the Most Improved Player, that wasn't really a shock at all with Randle. But Jordan Clarkson had a little bit of competition late. Like I think Derrick Rose had a good argument, but I think no one is really surprised that Clarkson is there. We got a trio of new awards, some of them less surprising than others, of course. So I'm going to start with a big one right away, and that's MVP. Nikola Jokic winning MVP, narrowly beating out Joel Embiid, and Steph Curry ended up coming in third place for that award. I remember when the three finalists came out, really hard to find any issue with that. The way that Steph was able to pull those Warriors back into contention, get them in the play-in game, just all the ridiculous scoring totals that he was putting up night in and night out. It's really hard-pressed to argue there. Joel Embiid, again, I mean, again, you don't need me to homer out, but we know Joel Embiid, just what he's been for the Sixers this year, how he's taken his game to a new level. But this really wasn't too much of a surprise for me. I don't think it should have been a surprise for everyone. Nikola Jokic, more than deserving of this MVP award. Everything that he's done for Denver, what he's meant for them. I mean, he's basically leading every meaningful offensive category. I mean, he's quite literally had one of the best offensive seasons from the center position ever. Of course, his Denver team is in the second round right now, facing off against Phoenix. We'll get into that in a little bit later. But yeah, I think this was a slam dunk for Joker. He played every game this season, and that really was the difference maker with Embiid. I mean, if Embiid had played the whole season, then I think you may have been splitting hairs here a little bit more. But given that Jokic played the whole season and Joel missed 18 games, I believe, I just don't understand how you can't make the argument for Jokic, so consistent all year long. And of course, a little bit of history as well, with him being the latest drafted MVP ever, number 41 overall. So that's really, really crazy. I mean, what a value. I mean, what a draft for Denver. Denver, I mean, they joked about it, the front office, is that they had two more chances in this draft to draft this guy. I mean, they picked originally Jusuf Nurkic over him to be the center. Of course, that was a debate, way back, I want to say 5, 6 years ago now, when they had both of those big men on the roster, and it was like, which one are you going to keep? I think Denver made clearly the right decision there. No disrespect to Jusuf Nurkic, a solid big, but yeah, absolutely an incredible season by the Joker. Really hard pressed to argue against that award. He got 91 of the 101 first place ballots cast. Pretty runaway. They're really, again, I don't think it was a unanimous situation, maybe necessarily, the way it was with Steph. And what I mean by that is because I do think that Jokic was the clear MVP. And so I think that distinction kind of gets lost sometimes when people bring up the unanimous MVP, but I mean, I don't know. Like, I always flash back to that Steph season in 2016 where he was just absolutely ridiculous. Like, just by far one of the most impressive displays of basketball that we've ever seen. That was unanimous. I mean, they won 73 games. For better or for worse, I guess I don't want to put anyone in that category unless you have that type of season and give them the credit of having the unanimous MVP. and so but that's not really a meaningful distinction. Again, congratulations to Jokic. We'll talk a little bit more about Denver in a little bit. The next award was Defensive Player of the Year. Rudy Gobert winning his third Defensive Player of the Year award. He won it in 2017, 2018, and 2019, or 2018, 2019 as well. He joins Dikembe Mutombo, Ben Wallace, and Dwight Howard as the fourth player to win that award at least 3 times. Mutombo and Ben Wallace lead the way. They both won it 4 times. Just absolutely ridiculous defensively. But, Gobert is certainly in that all-time elite defensive category as well. I think that there's certainly a chance that he wins another one of these awards. This one was a little more controversial, I guess, in the sense, like put it this way. I'm okay with Rudy Gobert winning this award. I think Rudy should have won the award. What he means to that Jazz team defensively, they were the number 1 overall team in the league, largely a huge part because of that team's defense, something, of course, that he anchors. He does have a ability to just stretch beyond the or beyond the paint that I think it's underrated a little bit as well. And so to that point, I don't really have any issues with Rudy Gobert winning the award. The people that seemed to be upset were the Ben Simmons delegation with the Sixers, and to me, it just became more of a philosophical argument than everything. I mean, again, I'm a Sixers fan. You don't need to sell me on what Ben Simmons does defensively night in and night out. Like, he can guard your 1 through 5. He can play 1 through 5, essentially, and he's night in and night out guarding the best player on the opposing team on the perimeter, which generally is a tougher position to guard than the paint is as well. He just, the way he uses his size, the way he, lead or among the league leaders in deflections, among the league leaders in steals. Like, Ben Simmons is an all NBA caliber defensive player, and the fact that he finished second here and challenged for this award that pretty traditionally gets dominated by big men. I mean, over the years, we'd have to go back quite a bit before we get the Defensive Player of the Year awards. I'm actually going to look at here where we go back to a guard. But the point is that I'm not really too upset with it, and I think that it gives the proper recognition to Ben anyway, and what he means for that. But again, Rudy, just what he means to that Utah team, and again, all the advanced numbers check out. He's pretty much leading every advanced category. Wow, it actually only was 2 years. Forgive me. It was Giannis won it 2 years ago. That's right. I get, power forward won a Defensive Player of the Year. So I guess, wow, that slipped me in the MVP discussion. But the point is that this generally skews to the centers anyway. And so I don't really, Rudy's done this for a long time. He checks out defensively. The team is good. Like, every metric you ask for is there. And so I'm not necessarily going to complain. If anything, selfishly, if I put the homer hat on, I think it's going to motivate Embiid and Ben Simmons to play, hopefully light a fire under them and keep this run going that they've been on for a little bit. We'll get that. We'll get to the playoffs here a little bit more later on. But the final award that I do want to talk about is Tom Thibodeau winning Coach of the Year for the Knicks. Phenomenal season. The Knicks just defied all expectations, finishing as the 4th seed. This was probably the most controversial, I think, of all the awards. Monty Williams was the other one. He finished second in this category for Phoenix. Just an excellent season as well. Phoenix finishing second in the West, 51 wins, 21 losses. Utah finishing 4th in the East, 41 wins, 31 losses. So I think immediately people point to the record, point to just how much Phoenix improved. They were out of the playoffs last year, breaking their long playoff drought, going all the way back to the 2000s. And just a team that has a real chance to win the finals this year at this point. I think, for better or for worse, a lot of people attributed that improvement to Chris Paul as well. I think the Suns have had a good young core for a while. I think Book has always been criminally underrated. I think DeAndre Ayton has taken the steps. I think the Chris Paul effect is also there too, though, and I think that hurt Monty a little bit in the case against Tibbs, where I don't think anyone on New York was just considered a star the way that Chris Paul or Book or even Ayton was. I mean, respect to Julius Randle and RJ Barrett, those guys balled out this year. Derrick Rose, again, had the hell of a season once he got over there. But it was just a difference in expectations. I mean, this is a Phoenix team that we saw win 9 games in the bubble. I mean, essentially should have been in the playoffs. The record was there. It was one of those weird scenarios where they did everything. The chips just didn't break the right way. But so we kind of knew that team was good already. I don't think that that's fair because, again, jumping all the way up to second in the West, I don't think that just happens by accident. I think that is a credit to Monty and a credit to his staff, and because it is the rotations too. It's the depth of this team that's really impressive right now. But I do think the Chris Paul effect is real as well. I mean, we've seen now it's been 4 teams, or everyone that Chris Paul goes to, he just instantly makes better. We saw it in New Orleans, we saw it in the Clippers, we saw it in Houston, and we saw it in Oklahoma City last year. Like, he raises the ceiling, and I do think that hurt him a little bit. Where with Tom Thibodeau, I mean, go back and pull the clip from the beginning of the season when Justin and I were doing the NBA preview. I had the Knicks in the bottom 3. Like, I thought they were going to be down there with Detroit and then maybe Cleveland, where, you know, they're fighting for worst team in the league. They were going to be in the sweepstakes for Cade Cunningham. Instead, they hosted a home playoff series, first round. Again, a little unceremonious the way they went out to the Hawks. So I think maybe the award doesn't quite, you know, Knicks fans there's a little bit of disappointment there, but given what Tibbs did with that roster, like, and how all these guys developed, how Emmanuel quickly developed, I don't really know how you give it to, like, I'm not disappointed, put it that way. Like, I think Monty Williams did a great job. I think he's a very, very strong second, but I gotta give Tibbs his credit here. No one on that team I thought was going to stand out the way that Julius Randle did. If you had told me, you could have taken a ton of money from me if you had said that the Knicks were going to finish 4th at the beginning of the season. It's a regular season award too. That's, I think, the thing we always got to remember with that is that, you know, playoff performance doesn't necessarily factor into that. It's what happened in the regular season. Again, the Knicks team was one of the worst in the league last year. The fact that they jumped all the way up to 4th, the fact that they finished ahead of teams like Miami and like Boston and like Atlanta. Now, again, Atlanta got a little bit of revenge when we beat them, but these are teams that were actively trying to win now. Like, I think the Knicks are just fully in young talent mode right now. It's develop your guys, it's build that stable culture, it's build a foundation, and they were all clearly on to something this year. And I think Tibbs did a great job getting the best out of all those guys. They've got something to build on next year. And we talk about this on the podcast all the time, but all the Knicks have to do is be stable, and they're going to make themselves a massive free agency destination. So the potential for that team to get a whole lot better, a whole lot faster, is going to be there sooner or later. And as for Phoenix and Monty Williams, I mean, listen, y'all got a chance to do something special this year, so I don't think you can really be too upset about that. You know, an NBA Finals trophy, a first Larry O'Brien trophy in franchise history, would be a whole lot better than winning a Coach of the Year award. Welcome, everybody, to the Drive-In Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rafuse. Joining me, as always, my co-host, Justin Kuzart. He is unfortunately not with us today. Again, I'm waiting for Justin to get back so we can just fully adequately describe how ridiculous the last week and a half has been and just explain all the technical difficulties. But again, thank you guys for bearing with us. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We will read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, you can find us on Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, TuneIn, Player FM, Amazon Music, Google Play Store. Anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. Watch the video on YouTube. Subscribe to the Drive-In Dish NBA podcast channel. You can see a video version of all the podcasts. In this case, you'll just see me staring at my computer talking for a little bit. We got some other stuff there as well, so make sure you subscribe and, you know, leave us a comment or something like that. And now a word from our sponsors. All right, so second round, we are midway right now. 4 series going on. Some a little more surprising than others. Some kind of going to plan, I think, at this point. So we're going to start over in the West with Utah against the Clippers. Utah is currently up 2-0. They beat the Clippers 117-111 last night as of recording this. I'm recording this on June 11th. And so taking a commanding lead there. Of course, this is the second straight series. The Clippers have gone down 0-2, bounced back. They're still here at this point. But Donovan Mitchell just absolutely on fire. 35 points last night, over 40 the first game, just completely dominating portions of that game. And it's funny because I think after the first game, people were generally inclined to give the Clippers almost the benefit of the doubt. And it was like, oh, well, they play pretty well. And whatever, the Jazz stormed back late. It's not that big deal. I had quite the opposite reaction. To me, the Jazz hadn't played in a while. They had been off against Memphis, where the Clippers had been in this tough 7-game series. They were seasoned. They were ready to go. They were kind of, you know, there's that rust factor that you got to shake off a little bit. And I remember in the first half of game 1, like, Utah just couldn't hit anything. I mean, just all sorts of shots that usually were falling for them weren't. And so the fact that they were able to storm back in that second half and win that game, it put all the pressures on the Clippers for game 2, and now, again, we're in a situation where they're down 0-2. The good news is, if you're the Clippers, is you're going back home, but that wasn't exactly a place that benefited them in the first round. You know, it was a place where they lost their first 2 games to begin with. They lost game 5 at home to put them down against the gauntlet. And again, they responded. They confidently won Game 7 at home against Dallas. But this is a situation where I don't know, like, I don't want to pronounce them dead, but it's pretty close. Like, they're in a must-win game already. The urgency's got to be there. I mean, Saturday at 8:30, they're the only game. Again, it's back at home, so you have to be encouraged a little bit, but just the inconsistency with the Clippers has just been the theme of their playoffs, really. They're just not the same team night in and night out. Utah has too much depth. Like, they won 52 games. I don't think we've properly given Utah credit the way we should, in the way that they don't accidentally stumble into a number one seed. Like, I believe it was J.A. Adonde tweeted this. It's like, we do this in the NBA all surprise. We're always surprised when the best teams end up winning. And it's like, here we are again. It was a little different this year with injuries and things like that. So I understood the arguments, but it's like, most likely our conference finals are going to be 1-2 versus 1-2, unless the Clippers flip this. And I certainly think they have the talent to, but they just got to be better. The contributions and it's crazy because they're getting, like, Reggie Jackson, for example, has had an excellent playoffs. Kawhi has been awesome most of the time. I know everybody will go back to that first game as well, where it's like, how is Kawhi not going to take that shot? Instead, trying to opt to go to Marcus Morris and then Gobert, credit him for making that defensive play at the end, game sealing block. But I don't know. Utah's cooking, and they're doing this. They're doing this without Mike Conley largely, so they're not even at 100% right now. If Donovan Mitchell is going to score like this, I don't really know what the Clippers are going to do. I mean, no one is stopping him right now. To me, if I'm the Clippers, I've got to be just putting two bodies on him at all times at this point. I mean, you got to let anybody else but him beat you. It feels like it's kind of been the strategy so far, almost, of like, let Donovan go off. We're going to try to shut down everybody else. Well, they haven't been able to, if he's going to go off that much, you're going to be in a tight situation every single game. So I think Utah is cruising. I do think the Clippers win Game 3 if I'm putting my prediction hat on. But, I mean, Utah is confidently in control of this series. This feels like a 6-game series. I thought this was going to go 7, could very well. I mean, I think there isn't a drastic difference between these two teams. But you got to feel good if you're Utah. I mean, defending your home court, you go into LA, you steal one of these games, and all of a sudden you've got a chance to close out a Game 5 at home. That crowd is going to be loud. This is a franchise that they recognize the opportunity that they have. And I think that's the thing in the Western Conference now with LeBron being out. And we'll get into Lakers a little bit later in this episode, but the Western Conference is wide open. It's more wide open than it's ever been in a long time. I would say that Brooklyn is the clear favorite at this point if we're looking at everything in the grand scheme of pictures. But, I mean, these are teams that have an opportunity. And I remember there was that graphic going around. I believe ESPN had it. But, I mean, we're looking at a scenario where all 8 teams of these left, I think over half of them have never won an NBA title. And for the 3 franchises that have, the Sixers haven't won since '83. That's the shortest drought. Atlanta and the Hawks franchise, they haven't won since the '50s. I don't even think they were in Atlanta. I'm pretty sure they were in St. Louis still at the time. And then, I mean, the Nets, and then, well, the Knicks were in that graphic, and the Mavericks were in that graphic as well. The Mavs would have been a lot shorter, obviously, in 2011. The Knicks back in the 70s. I mean, Utah has never won. The Clippers have never won. Phoenix has never won. Denver has never won. Yeah, Denver's never won. And the Bucks haven't won since the 70s. That's the one I'm missing. It's the Bucks. The Bucks haven't won since the 70s with Kareem. So at that point, you're looking at 3 of the 8 franchises have only won. In the case of the Bucks, it's the only title they've won. In the case of the Hawks, it's the only title they've won, I believe, I'm pretty sure, unless it's even pre-NBA at that point. The Hawks winning, they had that year where they upset the Bill Russell Celtics. And the Sixers, it goes all the way back to '83. And, before that, you're looking at, I mean, it's 83, 67, and then 55. In the 55 championship, they were in Syracuse. So this is a rare scenario where parity almost may rule. We talk about the franchises. I mean, I think at one point it was only 10 had won since 2000. So that will be a little cool that somebody new is going to get it this year. Obviously, the Nets have a strong chance to get their first championship as well. And so we'll see what ends up happening across the board in terms of that. But I think the historian part of that is a little cool. But I think everybody recognizes the opportunity, and especially, again, in a Western Conference. LeBron James, and if not LeBron, the Warriors have just dominated the finals for this past entire decade. And the fact that you don't have to deal with either of them right now, it is certainly the opportunity. It's there. The blood is in the water. And that's where, let's go over to the next Western series and just get right into Phoenix. You've got Phoenix and Denver. Excuse me. Phoenix up 2-0. Pretty convincing win in Game 2, and I mean pretty convincing one in Game 1. Honestly, Chris Paul is only getting healthier with that shoulder injury, which I think should scare everybody. Through 2 games, he's got 38 assists and 0 turnovers. I mean, just point God. What else is there to say? Absolutely been dominant so far. Mikal Bridges looks great. DeAndre Ayton's really been the story of Phoenix for me. Just an absolute breakout campaign for him. And so I think you've got to be thrilled with that. He's really, I feel like he sacrificed a lot on the offensive end, a lot of his touches to play more within the system, and it's certainly paying off right now. They're seeing the results of that. Of course, Book is the type of player who's made for the playoffs, one of the better ISO players in the league. It was interesting. I feel like Mike Malone is a guy who is very intense, but he's beloved by his players, and it feels like he knows the temp of that Denver locker room. And he called them out for, quitting and lack of effort and just, not really being there in game 2. And some of that is to motivate the younger guys a little bit. And again, I'm not gonna downplay what Mike Malone knows. Like, he knows how to motivate these guys. This is a team that, probably would be co-favorites with Brooklyn to me if Jamal Murray was healthy. Like, I think this team is absolutely loaded. But that to me is also kind of my counterpoint to that argument is I'm a little surprised that Mike Malone is saying they're quitting, just because I think they're a little outgunned here. Like, they had a tough time with Portland, but they got the job done, and which is great for them. Again, Michael Porter Jr. playing a big role in that. I think you've loved what you got from him this season. But without Jamal Murray, I always feel like there was kind of a limit on this team. And you knew whoever came out of that Suns-Lakers series was going to give you a buzzsaw pretty much. And that's kind of what it is that I think Phoenix is just a better team than Denver is. There's no way around it. Like, I think this is going to be by far the easiest series that Phoenix will ever have in these entire playoffs if they run the gauntlet. It's just a matchup that got robbed a little bit by injury. Now, I will say Denver is going to get a boost. Nikola Jokic, when he accepts the MVP award, like, he's going to do it in front of a full crowd. I think that home court maybe can rally them a little bit. And to that point, I could see them stealing a game 3 here with Phoenix. It's most of this young core's first playoff game, in that atmosphere as well. Denver's up high, with the whole Mile High. So I think that there is a little more of the grueling factor in that as well with having to travel. But this is a situation where I just think Phoenix is a better team. I don't really know how else to swing it. Like, I wish it wasn't this way, but it just kind of is. This feels like a 5-game series to me. I'm going to give Denver the benefit of the doubt. I think they're going to win a home game. But the supporting cast just hasn't been there enough. They need more out of Aaron Gordon. They need more out of the rest of their bench. Jokic is producing, but if the rest of the guys aren't going to be there, it's going to be a short series, and that's what I think we're kind of looking at now. And again, I appreciate Mike Malone's motivation tactics, but I think Phoenix is cruising. I think that this is a situation where, again, you go back to legacies. Like, I look at Chris Paul, and it's like, what an opportunity for him. I mean, he's never been to a finals. This is a situation where, and I think a lot of people after Houston probably thought he wouldn't necessarily get a chance. I mean, you certainly didn't think they would in OKC, given the mode that they're in right now, and with Sam Presti, building up draft picks and building up assets to build the next, hopefully, great Thunder team. But credit for Phoenix for making this move. It's the perfect fit too. Sometimes you just need that one piece to take you over the top. Like, Phoenix was a good team last year. They were going to be this year regardless. But Chris Paul just is that perfect fit as well. Like, the name of the game in the NBA is acquire talent and make it work. But when the fit works, it just sometimes does the work for you. And that's what I think we're doing here, what we're seeing here in Phoenix. And I think we're going to see them in a conference finals, either against Utah, who I think Phoenix has to, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think Phoenix matches up really well with Utah. And I think they have to like that as well. And if you're looking at the Clippers, the way they've been inconsistent, I feel like Phoenix has to think that they have a chance to beat them and knock them out at this point. So I think that they smell them again. The theme of the podcast of this episode is the blood in the water for some of these teams, and I think that that's exactly what Phoenix smells right now. It's a must-win game for Denver in Game 3. We'll see what ends up happening. That'll happen later on tonight, so we'll know by the time this episode drops. Going over to the Eastern Conference, starting with the Sixers and the Hawks. Series is tied at 1-1. Atlanta just blowing the doors off the Sixers in the first game. I mean, that was quite possibly the worst defensive performance of the Sixers season, I think, in Game 1. And credit to them, they came back and made it close, but I mean, at the end they still lost the game on their home floor. A tighter Game 2, the Sixers came out strong. I think they gave that initial punch, and it looked like, I think they had an 18-point lead in the first quarter. The Hawks battled back. Sixers are still up at halftime, but there were points in the third quarter where they were leading. And then the Shake Milton experience just happened. And this is a guy who has basically been out of the Sixers rotation for quite a while. He broke out last year and had 6th man, 7th man potential for this team. and just had slumped. I mean, this was a guy who had essentially been replaced by Tyrese Maxey at this point. I mean, he wasn't getting minutes. He played 1 minute in game one. And then he comes in, and I mean, everyone points to the shot to end the quarter, but it was, I mean, as soon as he came in and hit that first three-pointer, like Shake Milton is one of those gunner-type players where if he gets going, he's going to get going, and he's going to get buckets in a hurry, and I think that's exactly what the Sixers needed. Like, they just desperately needed this type of game from somebody. I mean, the stat that everybody goes back to, which is just absolutely outrageous, is that they lost, or is that the Hawks outscored the Sixers bench 32-0 in the first half. I mean, Kevin Huerter was awesome in game two. Danilo Gallinari was awesome in game two. And I mean, Huerter, especially in the first three quarters, he wasn't missing a shot. But the Sixers starting lineup was playing well. I think they finished game two with an offensive rating of 152, but it's like you have to get literally anything off the bench. And, credit Doc Rivers for calling his number, and credit Shake Milton for staying ready. They needed to just make something happen. They were down 1 point when Shake Milton checked in that game. When he ended up leaving that game, I think they were up 14. The game was over with at that point. The other story that everyone is going to talk about is the defensive adjustments, because Trae Young just torched the Sixers in game one. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he absolutely lit Danny Green up. Which led to the point is where it's like we go back to the defensive player of the year argument. How are you not going to put Ben Simmons on him? Like, to me, if you're not putting Ben Simmons on Trae Young or Matisse Thybulle is the only other one where you can, swing it, where I think if there's just a situation where Ben's on the bench, you have to have him on him all game. And it worked in game two. And it was just an obvious choice to me. Is it's like, you don't necessarily want him to follow players, but in the case of Atlanta, it is a situation where it's like, same with Utah and Donovan Mitchell. I'm going to try to suffocate Trae Young, and I'm going to let anybody else beat us. It's simple as that, plain as that. Like, the way that Trae Young carved up the Knicks and the way that he was locked in that game one, like, he is one of the best offensive players in the playoffs right now. You have to throw Ben Simmons on him at all times. It was there in game two. A lot of trades. I mean, he had over 20 points, but a lot of them came late. And so I think you just absolutely have to, just stick with that matchup. And I think if the Sixers get minimal production off their bench, they'll be fine. Now, Atlanta's done a great job. And I mean, they are going to take a hit, unfortunately, with DeAndre Hunter now out for the season with the meniscus tear. So that's definitely a loss to their rotation. But, the Hawks were a better team than I think most people gave them credit. And probably even me as a homer a little bit. Because I think most people had already penciled the Sixers into the conference finals. Instead, we're looking at a 1-1 series going back to Atlanta. Like, this is a situation where if Atlanta wins game three, all of a sudden you're looking at a must-win game four for the Sixers on the road. I think the Sixers starting lineup is better than the Hawks starting lineup, and I still think they're fine in this series. Like, I think they win it maybe in 5 or 6 games. But this is gonna be tougher. The Hawks do significantly have a better bench, and that's what the difference has been at this point. If the Sixers, again, just keep Ben Simmons on Trae Young, and I think you're going to be fine. Joel Embiid has been absolutely dominant. There's been no doubt about that. I mean, just such a casual 40 points in game two, and that was just, I mean, the first one since Iverson to do that. And just how effortless it was what surprised me. It was like, oh, it's one of those games where you look up and you have 40, and you're like, how'd that happen? Because it was just everything was clicking, but it wasn't, one of those flurry games. Like the Shake Milton aspect, I think, stands out more because of just what a flurry it was and how much it changed the game. But give credit to Seth Curry, too. Seth Curry's been balling out these playoffs, averaging 17 points a game. That's huge. If he starts hitting shots, Danny Green's a little more streaky. I think you get a lot out of him in the defensive end. And I think Danny Green he always just seems to be in the right place at the right time. Like, for example, him stealing that inbound or the jump ball in game one to just set the tone and get that dunk and start the game. Like, I think that's exactly what the Sixers needed. Granted, it ended up being back and forth a little bit, but you wanted to come out after game one, especially the way you got blitzed in the first half and throw that first punch. I think they were able to do that. They were able to hold on. I think the Sixers should be treating Game 3 as a must-win. For Atlanta, it's fine. Atlanta, if you come out of it, I mean, you want to defend your home court, but if you come out of this with a split, you just got to steal one more in Philly, and then you have a chance to potentially close this series out on your home court. I think if Atlanta, too, you're playing with house money. Like, Atlanta spent a lot of money to get to this position in the offseason, and obviously, I mean, any experience for Trae Young is better at this point, but I mean, you got to be thrilled with the way he's playing right now. You got to be thrilled with the way that a lot of these younger guys are playing right now. Like, John Collins has been really solid. Again, we mentioned Kevin Huerter. He's been awesome. The vets, Bogdanovich, Danilo Gallinari, have been solid. Like, Lou Williams had moments in the Knicks series that were super important for that team. Like, I just think they can the Hawks can play freer than the Sixers can. Like, if the Hawks lose this series, I don't really think anyone will view it as a disappointment. Quite the opposite. They won a playoff series, and if they take the Sixers toe-to-toe, I think you got to be pretty happy about everything moving forward. If the Sixers lose this series, it's an existential crisis. Like, you're looking at making major changes to this roster, given the situation that given the season that Joel Embiid had, given the defensive season that Ben Simmons had. Like, it would be a colossal disappointment. You lose to Milwaukee, you lose to Brooklyn, it's a different story. Whoever comes out of that series, I think there are expectations there. Those are both really good squads. We'll get into that here in a second. But, I mean, it would be, probably the Sixers and the Clippers out of everyone left. Maybe Milwaukee to an extent, but I think less than Milwaukee. But I really think the Sixers and the Clippers if they were to go out in the second round, you may have to re-examine everything. And again, the Sixers did their job, and they're a 1-1, so you're feeling better about them. But the Clippers, again, they're really going to be staring that down. So we'll see how that series plays out. But it's certainly, I think Utah is too good to pull that off again, as I said earlier, to pull off that comeback. And then, of course, Brooklyn and Milwaukee. Milwaukee winning a must-win slugfest last night, 86-83. Closing the game out on a 6-0 run, which I thought was the most impressive there. Chris Middleton just absolutely terrible in the first two games. Had 35 points for Milwaukee. Missed a couple of buckets late, but hit two clutch free throws to really put this away or give them the 3-point lead. Basically make it a prayer from Kevin Durant. I mean, Milwaukee had to win this game. There's no doubt about it. Obviously, going back home with Brooklyn, who is, and that to me is the scariest part, is that you're doing this without James Harden. I mean, James Harden, that's concerning when the hamstring, of course, which kept him out for most of the end of the regular season, just flares back up in game one. We know hamstrings are the type of injuries that just don't really heal that fast. Like, it's the type of injury that's going to linger. It's going to limit you throughout the playoffs. And so I think everyone going into this series, I honestly was talking to Milwaukee winning this series. I was at a situation where once Harden went down, there were points in the regular season where, make no bones about it, I think Kevin Durant is the best player on that team, but there were points where I thought Harden might have been the most important. And without Harden, when it was just KD and Kyrie, they were kind of playing 500 basketball. But then you just realize that, this is the regular season. Kevin Durant's still coming off injury. He's saving it for this. And then when he and Kyrie decide to play like this, it just doesn't really matter. And I think that's what we saw in the first two games is just, you want to talk about setting a statement, just blowing the doors off them. But it is more than that, though. It's the bench. It's, guys like Bruce Brown, who, we'll get into that last possession in a little bit, but he has been playing well in these playoffs. It's Blake Griffin having his resurgence. It's Tyler Johnson. It's Alize Johnson. It's Nick Claxton. It's Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot. It's Landry Shamet. It's guys like that who you're getting on these minimum deals. Like, they're filling out the roster pretty well. Joe Harris, I don't want to lump in that group because he's a starter. I think you kind of knew what Joe Harris was, but they do have sneaky depth, and it's incredible GMing by Sean Marks, and I think they're better defensively than you knew you were going to be able to compete with them offensively, but they're a better defensive team than people give them credit for as well. And so I think that's where it's rearing their head as the clear favorite right now. The fact, again, that they're doing this without James Harden, they're only going to get better. You're adding a top 5 player in the NBA back in that roster, and I think that's where they kind of put the league on alert, but give Milwaukee credit. They had to win that game. There was no doubt about it. That is a must-win game. They go down 3-0, it's over. You're not beating this Brooklyn team 3 times. And it was ugly. It was an ugly game. The Nets did come back. The Bucks had a big lead, and it was concerning. And to the point where Kevin Durant hit a jumper late, and the Nets were up, and it kind of felt like, oh no, it's swung. Like they might be in trouble right now. But again, Milwaukee went on that 6-0 run to close thing out. Drew Holiday hit a really big shot late, hitting the layup, and then Chris Middleton sealing the game at the free throw line. Look, I know Bruce Brown had a wide open lane, but I don't know what on earth he's doing there. Now the inbound pass was low, and they did have a timeout, so they could have called a timeout, which I thought maybe that was the decision. But I get going with it. The ball gets to Kyrie. I don't know how it doesn't find Kevin Durant. Kyrie's going to the right corner. KD was going left. Bruce Brown's got that wide open lane. They're daring him to take that shot, which is clearly the right decision. Pick one of them. This is Kyrie Irving, who had a game-winning finals shot in 2016. This is Kevin Durant. We know what he does. I don't know how the ball doesn't find him on that possession. And again, Bruce Brown had a look, but I don't know what you're thinking there, bud. There is no situation where it should have been Bruce Brown time in that scenario. I think it's funny. I honestly think everybody's going to laugh about it. In a way, I do like the confidence, too, where it's like, you know what, make a play. Because if that basket goes in, he might become one of these Brooklyn folk heroes along the way. I think he's already kind of on the way to doing that anyway. Like, it's a shame. It overshadowed. He had 16 points in that game. He played pretty well overall, 8 of 17 from the field. He had 11 boards. But just not a great scenario. And unfortunate, too, as well, because Jrue Holiday had went at Bruce Brown on that game-winning layup. So, a series to forget, I should say, for Bruce Brown. But again, the Bucks need to win that game. I still think they got to win Game 4. You don't want to go 3-1 back to Brooklyn again, just because I don't think you can. I don't see anybody beating this team 3 straight. Like, it's going to have to be this heavyweight battle. You're going to have to make it ugly because Giannis had 33 points. It was on 31 shots. Like, Brooklyn has done a pretty great job of defending him. He was 1 of 8 from beyond the arc. Like, and the free throw issues are concerning. I mean, obviously 4 of 9 from the line. What you worry about with that is if Giannis continues to struggle from the line, like it's the same issue with Ben Simmons, they're just not going to attack the way they should. Like, Giannis and Ben Simmons are both so gifted just athletically and strength-wise that they should be attacking the lane at will every single time. Like, at worst case scenarios, you're going to get fouled. Most defenders are just smaller than you. Like, there are matchups you'll be able to take advantage of to use your natural abilities. If that confidence starts going and Giannis starts settling for jumpers, it's going to be a real short series. Like, that's the reality. They need Giannis to stay aggressive. They need him to stay dialed in. Tune the noise out. Like, that's the other big thing. I do like, everybody kills Budenholzer's rotations. Second game was a blowout. First game, again, I don't think there's scenarios where they shouldn't be playing minutes. He played Giannis 43, played Chris Middleton 44, and he played Jrue Holiday 46. They just got to go the distance at this point. If they're going to make it a competitive series, they need everything they can get out of these guys. I still think Brooklyn closes in, 6 at most. I think we're looking at 5. Like, this Brooklyn team looks like a supernova right now. And again, they're only going to get James Harden. But, there's a chance we may not even see James Harden this series, which is pretty crazy. But, what else is there to say? It's just the analogy. Again, it kind of goes back to the stack up talent and make it happen. You make the trade for James Harden, you worry about the fit and everything like that. Are they going to be good enough defensively? Oh, well, we'll put it together and figure it out. Again, they look pretty darn good right now without James Harden, so imagine once he gets back in. This was only the first time that they were in their 8-man rotation. The only players off the bench that played in this game were Claxton, Mike James, and Landry Shamet for the Nets. But you've got their young guys, again, getting some burn right now. It's crazy because I thought this was going to be... I had talked myself into Milwaukee after the way they just blew out Miami winning this series, but I don't know. It's looking pretty bleak right now. Like we said, Brooklyn, no doubt about the title favorites. Just thank God for the sake of a competitive series that Milwaukee won that game. All right, who's balling, who's falling? Our NBA version of the stock market. We always like to start with the good before the bad. So balling for me this week, the regular schedule coming back. We're starting to get an idea of what it would look like. Adam Silver had always said along that, this was going to be a modified season coming off COVID, and as more people get vaccinated and things get back to normal, it looks like we're going to have a regular season next year. Training camps get underway in September, get into the season in October, get the full 82 game slate, have the, finals end in June and July. I think it's just, again, with fans back in the stands, it's just a sigh of relief for everybody. I think you got to be thrilled about that. Fallen for me this week is Nate Bjorkgren, officially fired by Indiana. The reports have been out there for a while, only 1 year with the team, apparently just clashed with everybody in the locker room, if you're to believe all the reports coming out. Indy did make the play-in game, ended up losing to the Wizards in that play-in game, but there were some that said, okay, well, maybe they got where they needed to be. And that's just kind of who they were. But it seems like Indiana is going to be going for more of a veteran coach here. Bjorkgren kind of clashed with that. If you get fired after 1 year, it's got to be pretty bad in the locker room. It doesn't happen that... Because, again, I don't think... I don't know. Indy kind of is who they are. I don't really think they didn't... I don't think they underachieved. I don't think they overachieved. But, if he lost the locker room, again, as you're trying to kind of figure out your core here with Sabonis and with Turner and with Malcolm Brogdon and with Karis LeVert now... then I think that if he's lost it that bad already, then it's probably best to move on. And so just it seems like an unfortunate end to that tenure, one that may not be remembered too fondly in Indiana. All right, so I want to look at the eliminated squads before we get out of here. And full disclosure, I'm not going to talk about the Miami Heat. We talked about the Bucks and the Heat last episode. We kind of went more in depth on Miami and what exactly happened there and what they need to do to stay contending with Jimmy Butler as he gets into his 30s. So if you're looking for that, go back. I do want to talk about the other 7 teams. And just so I'm going to run down the line starting in the West again. For Memphis, because just kind of look at their outlooks as well for a way of how I'm kind of break this down. For Memphis, again, I think it's great overall. Like, you got back into the playoffs, you won the play-in game against a Warriors team that nobody expected you to beat. You challenged Utah. The young core, again, we're talking about a core that's averaging, 23, 24 years old right now? Like, everybody took the steps that you wanted them to. Ja Morant looks like a certified star that you build around. You've got Jaren Jackson on the roster. You've got Kyle Anderson on the roster. You've got Dylan Brooks. Like, off last year, you wanted your young guys when they missed the play-in game, or when they were in 8 for most of the season, but then missed because of the play-in game. You want them to take the next step. I think they took the next step there in this season. I think that even with the loss to Utah, who just probably is a better team, I think there's a lot to build on there in Memphis, and I think they have a lot to be excited for going forward. For the Lakers, I mean, again, go back and pull all the clips of me saying the Lakers are the best team in the league for basically all season. I mean, it's shocking. I mean, this is the first round exit for LeBron James ever. Maybe it is, and that, I guess, is the thing to watch going forward, is it's like, maybe this is the end. Maybe this is the moment where we say, this just inevitability of LeBron James being better than everyone and beating everyone finally does come to an end as he gets into his late 30s. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that LeBron is about to be some scrub. I still think LeBron is, again, he could very well come back as the best player in the NBA next season, and it won't surprise me. But I got to be honest, I think we're finally, it's always been close, but I think we're finally at the point where the torch is getting passed to Kevin Durant if he's fully healthy. Like, I think it's always kind of been those two in that tier, with Steph knocking on the door as well in the past couple of seasons. But I think here with LeBron, everyone is going to point to health, because they were the best team defensively, and they were rolling until AD got hurt, and then LeBron had that ankle injury. Like, they were cruising. They were at the top of the Western Conference, and then and they slid, of course, and got a really unfortunate matchup in Phoenix. And the Phoenix is a really good basketball team. Like, that's a conference. I said before the series, that's conference finals level matchup in the first round. And so, I said same thing for the Suns. Like, if the Lakers had won this series, I think they'd be in the conference finals right now. Truly, I think they would have got by Denver. It was just the depth. I think the depth is where they're going to have a lot of questions next season. Is that Dennis Schroeder really wasn't that good with Andre Drummond, getting him and bringing him in. That didn't work out the way I think it wanted to. I mean, he was basically unplayable in an elimination game. That's certainly not what they brought him in there. They brought him in there to be the starter and to eat up minutes and to play next to Anthony Davis. I think that's going to be a major decision next year, and see what exactly Andre Drummond even gets out there. They're going to have to reevaluate the depth. Like, part of the reasons that I was so high on this Lakers team repeating is I love the move to go and get Dennis Schroeder. I love the Marc Gasol move. Like, to me, it kind of replaced a little bit of what they lost. But they just need that third star, I think, a little bit. They need that third guy to play with LeBron and AD. The question for me is, I don't know what the core you have, like how much value do you have with these guys? Like, Kuzma is a good rotation player at this point, but I think we all know that Kyle Kuzma is not a true third option. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Alex Caruso have been really solid players for this team. But again, what type of value do they have? How much do they get you back in a third star trade? They're going to have to get creative. It's a big season for Rob Pelinka because, again, with LeBron James at his advanced age, you got to maximize the most of these windows now. I don't really think it's a big deal at the end of the day because you already won a title with this team. So no matter what, it's a success. Like, at the end of the day, winning the title last year validates everything you ever needed with this squad. But it's an offseason of questions for the Lakers, and it's something that, maybe is a year earlier than we expected. They're going to be in the market to try to trade for every star. The question is, do they have the assets to do it? And that's really going to be interesting. The Trailblazers for Portland, I mean, they're going to have to shake it up, and they already have. They fired Terry Stotts. Terry Stotts very well could be head coaching again in the NBA, but that was always one of the casualties that we thought was going to happen if they didn't make the conference finals. I mean, I believe report was out there that he was just doomed no matter what. But I think it goes bigger than that. Like, I just think, I don't want to just fire the cannons all at once, but I think you got to trade CJ. Like, I think it's time. I think Dame and CJ have been this great backcourt, but it just hasn't worked. Like, I think it's already gotten to the point where it's hit its ceiling. They got to the conference finals one year. They've got good players in Portland. Like Yusuf Nurkic is a good player. You've got Robert Covington. Like you've got Simons. There are guys on that roster. Like it's not a total wasteland, obviously, but Dame Lillard just needs more. I mean, you're running the risk of him starting to get the eyes. I mean, that display in the first round where he dropped 60. I mean, it was one of the most impressive games I've ever seen. Like it was on fire mode in NBA Jam. It was truly god level mode where look, no matter what happened, it wasn't missing with Dame. And why do they lose that game? Because Robert Covington missed dunks and because CJ McCollum steps out of bounds. Like those are the type of games that I think start to break. Like Dame is this super loyal guy. Like he's this different cut of cloth, and I think that's why people like Dame Lillard so much. Like besides the fact that his game is super entertaining, I think people relate to Dame Lillard. Like I think he's the more down to earth, humble superstar, if you will. And I think you run the risk though of him just like there's always been the talk of him staying in Portland his whole career and finishing his whole career. Like these types of not making these changes is the type of thing that I could get him to walk. I just think we've seen this team now for 4, 5, 6 years. Like it's hit its peak. And that's where I think you try to just shake it up and make changes a little bit. I'm not saying you don't trade Dame Lillard. You just don't trade a player that good. He means too much to the franchise. Like I don't think you're going to ever get like, unless you draft the next guy, I don't necessarily know that you're going to ever get a player that back anytime soon or that good anytime soon. I think you look at trading CJ, I think everything should be available. And, and that's where it's going to be interesting. I mean, Portland kind of blamed it on not necessarily the personnel. It seems like they're just trying to throw it all on Terry Stotts. And it's like, that's not really the way for success, I think, at this point moving forward. It's got to be, they have to make foundational changes, and I wonder if they just end up having the ability to do it, or I think you risk losing Dame. And I know that's not what Portland fans want to hear, but I just think it is worth monitoring. And the other one that's, I think, are under a big scenario now is Dallas. And Dallas is just because you see how good Luka is. Like, this kid is special. They almost pulled this upset. You have to surround him with talent, and I think that people are starting to correctly give Dallas's front office a little bit of flack, as they should. I mean, they won the title in 2011. They didn't properly defend it, really. They didn't bring anyone back, and so you had the last few years of Dirk. They were good, but they never truly contended like that again after they won the title. Now you've got Luka, who is this special elite caliber player, the type of guys that franchises dream of drafting about. You have to surround him with the right amount of talent ASAP. The Porzingis thing isn't working right now. He said that he doesn't necessarily want to play second fiddle, so I think that's going to be interesting. You already potentially maybe look at moving on there. I think Tim Hardaway was awesome. I think you end up, he's locked in. I think Tim Hardaway is the type of guy that can play alongside Luka. He can get a lot of buckets in a hurry. Like, I'm fine with him. But after that, I think you got to evaluate everything. Like, you really got to go out, again, look for that third guy, really improve your depth, because they just have not really adequately, they've made some questionable moves and they've not adequately surrounded Luka. I mean, besides the KP move is looking a little suspect right now. We'll see how that plays out and again, how they handle the next one. The other one is a minor move. I mean, I think it's already fair to say that the Sixers fleeced the Mavericks last offseason for Seth Curry, for Josh Richardson. Besides the fact that it's on a contract and that Seth he fit way better next to Luka. Josh Richardson doesn't. He's not really a great outside shooter. That was kind of his problem in Philly as well. And now on top of it, you're going to have to pay him. He's on an expiring deal, so you're going to have to see what happens there. But that's the type of move that makes you have questions on what exactly the Mavs front office is doing forward. But they've got a big offseason coming up. Again, you can't waste these seasons with these type of players. Like Luka, the fact that he's this good already, the fact that he's on his rookie contract before it gets complicated, like, you need to get it done. Luka's not going to leave. He's going to sign that $200 million contract. No, come on. Let's not even entertain that. But you're in a situation where you got to start nailing these moves, and you need to, as you start building your next 5 years, if you want to take this team to the next level. They're great making the playoffs now. Luka's going to get you there, but if you want to start, making conference finals runs, making finals runs adequately, making the most out of this roster, this is the type of offseason they're going to have to nail as well. For Washington, for the Wizards, I mean, they're still going to be building around Bradley Beal, and that's the thing is, it's like I don't really know what the ceiling for this roster is. I think you're thrilled with the development of some of the guys with Rui Hachimura. Bertans is a good shooter. You still got him on the roster. I don't really know what else. Like, you're going to get Thomas Bryant back next year, so that in theory should be a boost off the ACL injury. again, I think there's just a ceiling with Russ at this point. I've said that for a while, and like I don't want to be a downer about it, but I just think they're kind of an 8 or a 7 seed for a while. Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook and the young guys will get you into the playoffs, and they'll have you in that mix. And I think there is something to be said about the way they played in the second half, but I don't know. I don't really. This isn't the type of roster. Like I would be trying to get out of that Westbrook contract at this point. Like I don't. I'd be trying to do everything I can to adequately surround Bradley Beal with everything he needs to win. And I just think, given the financial situation right now, they're a little capped. So I don't know what it looks like, but I don't think they're just going to fall off the cliff next year necessarily. With Boston, Boston's had they've had a wild ride, huh? Danny Ainge stepping down, and it's funny because Brad Stevens, all the rumors are going around that Brad Stevens was going to get fired. And I felt like that was almost a little unfair. Like, Brad Stevens has been there for a while now, but I feel like in this case scenario, like he was given such a flawed roster after 1 through 3. It just kind of, it wasn't really the best. Like, you had Tatum, who's awesome. You have Jaylen Brown, and Marcus Smart's a good player. But even that, Marcus Smart, like that 4 through 12 was all really kind of eh. To me, I blame the roster construction there and why they weren't able to make it work with Kyrie. And off the Isaiah Thomas trade, why it necessarily tanked your brand a little bit. And that's with Danny Ainge. Like, I feel like that was I remember I go back to Anthony Davis's father being like, yo, he'd never play there, even if he gets traded in Boston. Like, I think there's been that rep at times, and I think that and the combo of Danny Ainge's comments when Boston players just come out and said, Tristan Thompson first, and a couple of the other guys have said, yeah, we dealt with some racism in Boston at times. And then Danny Ainge, a white guy who obviously has been in Boston for quite a long time, goes, oh, I don't really necessarily know that. I don't know. I didn't hear it. Okay, Danny, of course you didn't hear it. You're a white dude. They're not going to be chanting racial stuff at you, guy. Like, that's just kind of, it's insensitive and tone deaf. And it just seems like you're missing the point here. It's like, it doesn't matter what you heard. It matters that it's unacceptable. And so to that point, I think it was a double whammy. Now, I didn't expect in a billion years and Brad Stevens to go up to the front office. And that's the intriguing part to me, is where it's like, whoa, Brad Stevens doesn't want to coach anymore. I mean, there were the Indiana rumors. He wanted to stay in Boston. The NBA mentioned. Now he's just transitioned to a front office role. So I think that's going to be interesting. Given him that type of power already, I would have never have seen it playing out like this. As for Danny Ainge, again, give him credit. You give him credit for the '08 team. He won the championship. I think, credit is due where credit is due. But I think the job over the past couple of years, like, the running gags of all the missed trades, all the guys that he built up all these assets, and then he just never really pulled the trigger. And so you've got Jason Tatum and you've got Jaylen Brown. You've got these two guys, and making Kemba Walker was a good swing. They're going to we'll see what happens with Kemba this offseason. Apparently, he's not happy there anymore. I thought Kemba had bounced back in the second half of the season, so I thought you could be encouraged about him moving forward as part of that roster. But, he was mentioned in trade rumors as well, so if the bridge is burnt there, maybe you end up moving on. I don't think it would be the end of the world if Kemba Walker moves on from Boston. Like, I do think, given his age, if you get a good return for Kemba, some guys that maybe fit more in line with Tatum and Brown, then that's the type of move you make. But it's going to be an offseason of change. It's nice that you have those top two locked in. Like, that makes it a lot easier, but they're going to have to figure out how to fill out the rest of that roster to kind of rebuild their image, I think, a little bit in the front office. But, again, with Danny Ainge being gone, I do think that matters, and I do think that will help a little bit. I'm just super intrigued. I never thought in a billion years that Brad Stevens would end up being in the front office. They, of course, have a head coaching vacancy to fill now, too, so that will be his first test there to see who he does, and we'll see if he can end up nailing that hire. The final team that I want to talk about before we get out of here is the New York Knicks, and I think they're just in one of the more enviable positions. I kind of talked about it at the beginning of the episode with Tom Thibodeau. All they have to do is be stable. You're in New York. Like, you have one of those. It's New York, LA, and Miami, I think, are those rare organizations that just will be in the conversation for every free agent ever. I think a big reason that KD and Kyrie went to Brooklyn is just because they were more stable. They wanted to be in New York, but they want to go to the more, the Nets have been a better organization since Billy King got let go, essentially, and Sean Marks took over, the organization has been really competent, and now clearly they're the favorites to probably win this whole thing. But for the Knicks, I think this is the best case scenario. There's a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth. I think losing to the Hawks, given the way it did, going out in 5, like, you had a chance to win game 1, and I think that could have been a little more competitive. Like, the talent level between the Knicks and the Hawks wasn't super different. And so I think at that point it's a little disappointing. But it's like, you have the coach of the year with Tibbs. Derrick Rose looks great. It looks like he could be a big part of your rotation going forward, and he super rehabbed his career there. But it's the young guys. It's R.J. Barrett. It's Julius Randle. It's Emmanuel Quickley. It's these guys taking the steps is what's going to bring the next generation of good Knicks teams. Like, I think maybe you saw that this current team, as established, has a ceiling. But if you're a potential superstar, why would you not look at this roster and go, hey, I want to join it? They have all the tools there. Maybe I am that Chris Paul. I'm that one missing piece who comes in and takes this roster to the next level. All New York has to do is remain competent, and they're going to be in the conversations to do that. And on top of that, if you keep developing assets like this, developing these young players, you're also going to be in the position to make a trade if you have, if a James Harden becomes available again, if someone down the line, whatever that next superstar insert here may be that decides they want out, if Bradley Beal, decides he wants out of Washington, if Dame Lillard truly decides he would actually want to leave Portland, again, spoiler alert, I don't think he is, but you just have options. You have flexibility, you have options, and that's the name of the game. Again, I thought the Knicks were going to be at the bottom of the league this year. This is a best case scenario type deal. You nail your draft pick, you keep bringing in young players. They did it. The front office did a great job as well. I mean, look at what Nerlens Noel did for there in terms of rehabbing his career, in terms of how excellent he was defensively this year. Veterans who just want to play in New York. Look at what a guy like Taj Gibson did coming on that roster and just providing some solidarity there. They're going to have to make decisions on certain things. Like with Mitchell Robinson, for example, I think they're going to have to make a decision on what they do on the big front, because he's been injured just so much now. He's looked great when he's been healthy, but he's been hurt a lot. And so it's like, do you go with Nerlens Noel and maybe try to get somebody else? But the point is they have options. Like, this is the brightest outlook I've had for the Knicks in ages. I mean, the Dolan factor still looms, but as long as they keep Dolan out of sight and out of mind, everything else will be fine. Like, that's why you hire Leon Rose. That's what, to build this front office, to build this credibility. If they keep the credibility going, all it takes is one free agency, and all of a sudden the Knicks are right back in it. Again, a tiny bit disappointing given the way that the season ended. I think it would have been the ultimate icing on the cake for this team to go out and win their playoff series. But I do think they're going to have decisions, minor decisions to make, but I do think everything is going forward. Real quick, I did say I wasn't going to talk about Miami, but I do want to mention real quick, Pat Riley got fined $25,000 for tampering about the... he mentioned comments about, like, if LeBron wanted to come back, he'd leave the key under the mat. Really? That's what the league is going to fire him for? Like, that was the tampering thing of all... Like, anyone on earth would take LeBron back. It just is funny to me with the way that all these guys tamper all the time, that's the Pat Riley comment, that the NBA decided, you know what, we got to step in and find somebody, we got to tamper him. Just kind of wild to me. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. We appreciate you guys. Again, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for bearing with Justin, bearing with us. We will try to be back here as soon as possible. Hoping next week, fingers crossed, that Justin and I will be back. Again, though, thank you for bearing with me in the meantime. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We'll read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, Google Play Store, Amazon, Spreaker, TuneIn, Player FM, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. Like the Facebook page at Drive and Dish NBA Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube page at Drive and Dish NBA Podcast, and you can watch video versions of all the podcasts. Again, thank you guys. Sorry for the wait. We'll have stories to tell whenever Justin gets back.